Welcome back. We are more than halfway done. This is the beginning of the second half of the textbook. We are in chapter 7. And in this chapter, we're going to be talking about autobiographical memory and how we recall important events from our lives. All right, well, that sounds pretty interesting. Let's get started. So, first off, let's just talk a little bit about what autobiographical memory is. Autobiographical memories would be those memories that you have of specific events that you have personally experienced. So, anytime that you've gotten to ride the timber hawk, that would probably be stored away as one of your autobiographical memories. So it's memory for some specific life event. It's held in your episodic memory store. If you recall from the last chapter, we talked about the episodic memory store being part of your semantic memory. And so this would be that episodic memory store where you'll remember the context. You'll remember the emotions that were present, the weather that day. You'll remember having experienced the event, as opposed to remember just the larger semantic memory store where you've got a bunch of facts and you don't remember when you acquired them or that kind of thing. This type of autobiographical memory, you absolutely remember a lot of details along with the specific memory. Now, I think I already alluded to this previously when I was talking about episodic memory. Some autobiographical memories are so old, probably is one thing. Often repeated, maybe it's part of your family folklore or it's so much part of your self-concept or something like that, that it's actually moved away from just being an autobiographical memory and has transitioned into autobiographical fact. And so autobiographical facts typically are things that are just general knowledge about yourself and your personal history. This would be held in your semantic memory store. This is those kinds of memories are context free. Like you have no context for why you know what your birthday is. You have no context for how you know what your name is or if you were like me, and so you guys are a lot younger, I don't know if you had this experience, but being born into a household that had a home phone in it and knowing that phone number, like back in the olden days of, 1990s, people had to memorize phone numbers sometimes, and everybody knew their own phone number for sure by heart. And, when I was a little kid, we lived my entire life in one town, and my mom was able to, even though we moved 3 times, she was able to get the phone company to keep giving us the same phone number. So my entire life, from birth until I moved out of the house at age 20, my entire life, my phone number was the same. And you better believe I have no recollection of learning that phone number. Like that was an autobiographical fact. I just knew what my phone number was. That if you were lucky enough to have had that kind of stability where you had the same phone number for your entire childhood, you might be able to relate to what I'm talking about as phone numbers potentially being an autobiographical fact. There are a lot of stories that your family tells you about yourself, about some time that you did something when you were little and you honestly don't directly remember it, but you kind of maybe sort of feel like maybe you should remember it because everybody talks about it so much and you've seen yourself in pictures doing it and stuff like that. That's a memory that's probably more of an autobiographical fact than a memory because you don't really have the context. The only way you have any context is the additional details that your family tells you, because if it was up to you, you maybe wouldn't have remembered it at all. That would be a good example of an autobiographical fact. My mom and dad love to tell this story about when I was little, and I have absolutely no recollection of at all what they're talking about, but they've told it so often that I think I might be developing a false memory for it, where I can almost see myself in it. But I know as a kid, I remember them telling the story and me thinking to myself, I don't remember that at all. Like, I don't even know what you guys are talking about. Now, as an adult, I've heard it so often. And in fact, now I have repeated it myself that I almost feel like I can remember the event, but I have to keep reminding myself, nope, you don't really remember the event. It's an autobiographical fact. It is not an autobiographical memory. Other people have filled in these details for you and you don't really, you know that it happened to you, but you don't remember it happening to you. All right, so let's compare autobiographical memories to autobiographical facts. So, first off, the experience of remembering, that feeling of retrieving it from your memory bank is always present when you're talking about autobiographical memories. It's rarely present when you're talking about facts. Like, you don't have to search your memory to recall your birthday. Like, that's just an autobiographical fact. It is what it is. Your personal interpretation. Do you, do you impose some top-down processing on this memory content? Almost all the time on an autobiographical memory, do you do that kind of top-down processing where you're interpreting the meaning of the memory, the meaning of the context, all that stuff? Rarely do you do that with autobiographical facts. Rarely do you impose any kind of top-down processing. Instead, it just is a fact. The truthfulness of your autobiographical memory, it's variable like any other memory, right? Sometimes your memories are accurate and sometimes they're inaccurate. We're going to talk about memory construction and stuff like that later. But so when you retrieve a memory, whether it's autobiographical or any other episodic memory, it may or may not be an accurate representation of what really happened. Autobiographical facts tend to be truthful because they tend to be facts. Now, the story that your parents have told you about yourself and you're like, I don't remember that, but I'm trusting you because you're my parents. I guess there's a possibility that they might be telling the story wrong or adding in details or leaving out details. I mean, they might have just made up the whole thing. Maybe, they want you to believe you went to Disneyland when you were little and you never went to Disneyland and you don't remember having been at Disneyland except for that your parents told you that you were. It's possible they just want you to think that you had a childhood that included a trip to Disneyland and you never really went. It's possible. Let's assume that your parents wouldn't do that. We're going to say there's a high likelihood that your autobiographical facts are accurate. But we're going to have that little skeptical thing in the back of our minds that, whatever source of autobiographical fact could be wrong or be lying or manipulating us, or, we'll be a little bit skeptical in the background on that. Context-specific sensory attributes, always present with autobiographical memories. So if you have ridden a roller coaster, for example, you probably have a whole, all your senses were probably activated during that ride, right? So you have all these details that came in through your sensory organs while you were having that experience. And when you retrieve that memory, you pull back most of them, right? Like it's part of the memory. Whereas with autobiographical facts, you hardly ever have an autobiographical fact that has that kind of context. Like you really don't have sensory attributes. You might have maybe a sense of having seen it through your own eyes, like I was kind of describing with the story that my parents have told so often, and it's just become a fact. And I almost feel like I can see it through my eyes, like through the first person experiencing the event. But I think that's false. I think I'm filling that in after the fact. I don't really remember the event, so how could I remember what it would look like through my own eyes? Like all I have is my parents telling of that fact. So rarely do you have that sense of, visual cues or, tastes or smells. Rarely do you have that with autobiographical facts. Self-reference, well, this is an autobiographical memory, so surprisingly enough, that's going to be high because autobiographical means it's about you. So yeah, you're going to be thinking about yourself in an autobiographical memory. Autobiographical fact, it's about you. So probably you're going to be referencing yourself in that. So yeah, not to sound self-absorbed, but these memories are about you. Usually autobiographical memories are, they can last years where they still have a vividness. I was just telling somebody about something that happened when I was 21 years old. So a long time ago. And they said, man, you tell the story like it happened yesterday. Well, let me just tell you, the story involves being bitten by 2 fire ants. I went into anaphylaxis and almost died. Like I had no idea I was allergic to anything. I had never seen hives before in my life. And so when I broke out in hives, I was like, what is this? It wasn't until I was having difficulty breathing that I finally realized something's wrong with me. And I didn't necessarily attribute it to the ants because I've never been allergic to an insect before. So when I went to the doctor, I didn't even go to the emergency room. I was so sort of like, thinking it was nothing really and that I was overreacting. So I went to the doctor's office and he goes, "What did you eat?" And I go, "Well, nothing, just, things I eat every day." And he goes, "Did something bite you today?" And I said, "Well, 2 fire ants." And I'd never been bitten by a fire ant before. I had just moved to Florida briefly. And so he goes, "Oh, okay, the fire ants," because apparently like 1% of the population is allergic to fire ants. And so he treated my anaphylaxis. But I was telling the story, and you guys might have the same sensation that I am back in it when I recall that memory. Like I am right back there. And I remember exactly the mostly confusion that I was feeling. I didn't have a lot of feeling of fear really because I couldn't understand what was happening. Like, what are these red marks all over my skin? Why are my ears ringing so loudly? Oh, my scalp feels like it's itching. Like, what is all of this? And finally, when I was like, I'm having trouble taking a deep breath, I should probably go to the doctor. I took it so lightly that I actually stopped and dropped off my paper that was due that day in my professor's box before I went to down to the doctor's office. So I was not taking it super seriously, and the doctor could tell. He said, "You have like 20 minutes next time. You need to get an EpiPen and watch where you sit." But anyway, because I had put my foot in a planter while I was eating lunch and reading, he's like, "Yeah, you can't be doing that." Anyway, the fact that it's so vivid for me, even though that was, that happened in 1987, shows you that your autobiographical memories can last a really long time, and they can maintain a lot of their vividness for you for a really long time. Autobiographical facts also last for years and probably even longer, because a lot of your autobiographical memories will, over time, through retelling, revisiting that memory, thinking about it over and over again, like that can move into autobiographical facts. And I think that's why a lot of people are surprised that I tell my ant bite story with such detail, is that it's like, shouldn't that be a fact by now? And all you say is, "Yeah, I had anaphylaxis to ant bite," and move on. But I tell this, very elaborate story of how I felt at the time and all these things. And they're like, I think what they're saying is most people who are telling a story that's, 35 years old, will have a little bit less detail. It'll be less memory-like and more fact-like, much more dispassionate, like almost like it happened to someone else, right? Because it's just part of your history. It's not really part of, but I have to say, every time I think about that event, it does bring back like the idea that if I had been in just a little bit slower and picking up what was going on, I could have been in serious trouble. And I think it's like a big warning for me that, I almost, was too lackadaisical about it. So I think that's kind of kept it more active as more of a memory and less of a dispassionate fact is basically my explanation with that. So like I was saying, your autobiographical memories over time can transition into autobiographical facts. And usually that's through lots of use of that autobiographical memory. Either you're in your head reflecting on it, or you talk about it a lot, or you write about it in your journal, or you write a book about it, or, these kinds of things. Like using it a lot actually makes it more likely that it'll transition into autobiographical fact, because your brain has come to the conclusion, okay, this is really super important. This obviously is like key to my self-concept. This is part of my story. And so I need to transition it over here where I'll keep it forever in my autobiographical fact files. So this is the difference. This is my little chart that helps to distinguish autobiographical memories from autobiographical facts. So hopefully that keeps them separate in your mind, in your episodic memory, not your autobiographical memory, but your episodic memory about this topic. All right. Well, let's go ahead and take a break here, and we'll come back in the next segment and talk about how we can study autobiographical memory.